And welcome once again to the Tzemach Bible Institute program. I'm John Klein, and with me this evening, as usual, is Ken Garrison, pastor of Fellowship Church and founder of the Tzemach Bible Institute. Good evening, Ken.
Good evening, John.
Ken, does God build up nations and tear down nations to fit into His purpose for the world today?
We would believe that indeed God molds human history in order to accomplish His ultimate purpose, and we're going to see some examples of that today. But before we do so, I just want to make a couple of comments. We're recording this program on Tuesday morning, and just in a matter of an hour or so, Mr. Barack Hussein Obama will be inaugurated as the new president. And as with any new administration, there's a host of choices, and perhaps with Mr. Obama more than usual. The whole country seems to be at a crisis mode in many, many areas. One of the most important areas, especially from a biblical perspective, will be the policy that Mr. Obama forms relative to Israel and to Islamic terrorism. The characters that he has appointed or is in the process of choosing to assist him, namely Hillary Clinton, George Mitchell, I can't remember, Dennis Ross, for example. Some of these are retreads from the Clinton administration in the past, but these don't sound very hopeful from a biblical perspective. Now, Mr. Obama, he confesses to be a Christian, but he's the first U.S. president that has such close ties to and has been so strongly influenced by Islam. And so all of these things causes us to have real concern. So we want to exhort you today. We're going to set forth a biblical perspective, but we want to exhort you to pay a particular and very, very close attention to what this administration actually does, and maybe not so much attention to how it's reported in the media, because the media has demonstrated itself to be incredibly biased in this regard. So we're going to have to pay close attention to what is actually done. And so we want to develop today a thesis of God being the author of human history in that regard.
Okay, so we want to talk then about the theory of world history, and there are many theories, but we are going to maintain that God is the author of human history, Ken, and that we maintain that God exercises His authority to bring about and to ensure His ultimate purpose in the earth, and that His ultimate purpose is implemented. And so He's not just sitting up there and things are playing out haphazardly. He's actively involved, not only in your life, but in national lives in the same manner. Okay?
So we think of man as having free will, and to a large degree he does, but we're maintaining that overriding the free will is God exercising His sovereignty to accomplish His purpose. Rather than just voicing our opinion, however, we want to go to a scriptural example that specifically illustrates this, and to do so, we're going to Jeremiah chapter 18. Jeremiah, the Lord said to Jeremiah, go down to the potter shop. And so Jeremiah did so, and when he did so, he saw a potter with a wheel with clay forming a pot. And along the way, I guess the pot didn't quite turn out the way the potter desired to. And so he brought it back down just to a ball of clay and restructured it according to his will. And then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, which illustrates God's sovereignty over the nations. I want to ask John if he would read this account to set the stage for what we're maintaining today.
Okay, so Jeremiah had just witnessed what Ken said. And verse 5, then the word of the Lord came to me saying, Can I not, O house of Israel, deal with you as this potter does, declares the Lord? Behold, like the clay in the potter's hands, so are you in my hands, O house of Israel. At one moment I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to uproot, to pull down, or to destroy it. If that nation against which I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent concerning the calamity that I plan to bring on it. Or at another moment I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to build up or to plant it. And if it does evil in my sight by not obeying my voice, then I will think better of the good which I had promised to bless it with. So that's clear. That's a scripture you don't hear much, but it clearly declares God's sovereignty. And the great example that God uses is the potter molding the clay to what he wants it to be.
So not only does we as individuals or small groups have choice set before us, in accordance with this, nations have the choice also and have the power to act in righteousness and be blessed, or to act contrary to God's voice, and but with the prospect of suffering the consequences.
But at the same time, God's hand is hidden from unbelievers. How would you think that God's actively involved if you don't believe anything? So to us who see the wisdom and try to get a hold of God's opinion and how we should act and interact with one another, the Bible is a great record, and we ought to be able to see this.
Absolutely. I like to make reference to Albert Einstein, who made the observation from the standpoint of studying the most fundamental aspects of physics and the physical creation, made the statement, God is subtle. Mm-hmm. And so, as you said, his action is in the background, and it's hidden from unbelievers. But a person who acts in faith and exhibits faith toward God can see the hand of the Lord along the way. And that's very, very, very important for us. We want to bring a couple of examples, historical examples, that we believe illustrates this point also. And one of the best ones that I can think of personally is from the Battle of Midway in 1942 in the Pacific. June the 4th, 1942. We're just 6 months now from Pearl Harbor, and the Japanese Navy was a much superior force to the American Navy, and the American Navy had been decimated at Pearl Harbor just 6 months earlier. The Japanese had 5 carriers. The U.S. had 3, and it was fortunate that the carriers were not tied up at Pearl Harbor, or we wouldn't have had that. The Japanese Navy was much better trained, better equipped, just better in every wise than the American Navy. And then on that crucial day, everything that the U.S. Navy did succeeded, and everything that the Japanese Navy attempted to do failed. And I believe 4 of the 5 Japanese carriers went to the bottom that day. The Japanese Navy was crippled from that point forward in the war, and many historians would maintain that the real ultimate fate of the Pacific War and World War II was determined on that one. Now, obviously, there's many battles following that, and there's horrible battles, as a matter of fact, that we can track. But the real fate was determined. So when we see such a obvious naval force that just outmanned in every sense, and yet they were totally prevailed. And we see, by the way, we see something very, very similar to that in the 6-Day War in Israel, something very much similar. And the Israeli forces prevailed in in every sense, coming to take Jerusalem, and the soldiers coming to the wall to pray, to give thanks to God, because of the recognition that God had sovereignly intervened
Right.
there also.
Certainly, the whole world looked at Israel in awe because of that victory.
Absolutely.
It was very apparent, and we know a lot of Israelis that aren't full of faith, but they had faith that day. They understood
we hear that,
what happened.
We hear that testimony over and over again of the obvious recognition of God's sovereignty being exercised, and that dominion, and they prevailed on every front,
right,
in an awesome sort of way.
So now we believe that the United States, there's a uniqueness in this history of the United States. The United States, if we look back at the Declaration of Independence, 1776, about 233 years ago, then after that, the Constitution is ratified, and 13, 15 years after that. So we have this the rights of individuals in the country, the idea that the government exists to protect the people. This came along a couple of hundred years ago, and then the United States really came into prominence about the same time that God was calling back the Jewish people. The United States became a superpower.
Okay, so if we think about that in that sense, I often talk about in prophecy classes of action and reaction, and we see God specifically acting to pull the Jewish people back from all the nations into the nation of Israel.
Now, Ken, that's an important part. A lot of people think that Satan acts and God reacts. Actually, it's God acting and Satan reacting to what God's doing.
I think,
or trying to short circuit what God's doing.
I think that's true because we have a specific statement by Jeremiah 31:10, I think it is, that he that scattered Jacob will regather him
and watch him as a shepherd watches his
absolutely
flock.
and so we can see in the late 19th century and throughout the 20th century, now into the 21st, there has been a persistent movement of the Jewish people back into the land. The population now, something like 6 million or 6.5 million?
Just right up there as the country with the most Jewish people.
By the way, for the first time in 2,600 years, the dominant grouping of Jewish people is in the land of Israel, the people of Israel in the land of Israel. Now, just as God has been doing that, by the way, the reaction to that has been the emergence of global superpowers and what will become ultimately, we believe, the so-called beast or Antichrist government. But the United States has emerged as the dominant world power just as those things were taking place. Yeah. And so the United States has a very, very, very important potential at this point in time. And now we're looking at this today. It's true and has been true for 50 or 60 years now, especially since World War II. But it's particularly true as we are seeing now a new administration coming into power, and the ominous aspect of that is that administration appears to have pretty close ties and maybe very strong influence from Islam.
Okay, so now, actually, for the United States to be the world superpower, this started to emerge after World War II. The Soviet Union, United States were rising. We know with the demise of the Soviet Union and the limiting of that empire, that we stand alone as a superpower. So as Israel is coming into his own as a nation, we are the lone. Now, we always hear about the West, but we are the leader of the free world. We are the leader of the West. And Islam has been dormant until when God started this is the reaction to God acting, bringing back the Jewish people. Islam rose up with the discovery of oil, and they are active today as a world power.
Okay, now, John, with that in mind, I'm going to change directions or focus just a bit. We all know from a biblical perspective, we maintain that God exercised foreknowledge, and the very basis of prophecy is foreknowledge on the part of God, and he conveys that to men, women, whoever prophets. We maintain also that Satan has a dimension at least of foreknowledge. And so we want to look at that theme just a little bit, because that seems evident in the world today also.
Okay. Now, we could gather that from actually the book of Exodus, as Israel now is pushed into slavery, as they are becoming more numerous. What was Pharaoh's first act? He had the midwives to all the female babies that were born to save them, but all the males were to be drowned. So he was killing off the males in anticipation of Moses being born. So like Satan knew what was coming out, that dimension of foreknowledge.
And maybe not quite as specific as God, because he's a shotgun technique.
Right, so he didn't know which one, but he was looking to short circuit the one that would be the deliverer of Israel. In the same manner as the wise men came to Herod and said that there's one going to be born, we followed his star, and the Bible prophecy experts of Herod's day said it's going to happen in Bethlehem. And so Herod said all the male children 2 years old and under will be executed. So there again, this is the enemy trying to shortchange. Is there a comparison with the Muslim nations in Israel?
I think it's obvious. Obviously, again, looking at this general sense of foreknowledge that we believe that Satan at least has a dimension of, knows, of course, that ultimately God would bring the people of Israel back into the land of Israel. And so this territory, the land of Israel itself, was first overrun by Muslim forces in 635 AD, and they controlled it, dominated it. Well, you might consider a few years now and then with the Crusaders that they at least controlled portions of the land, but basically all the way up through World War I, Muslims controlled the land of Israel. Now, with the emergence of the State of Israel in 1948, it was like a collection of Muslim nations surrounding, I don't know, people talk about, 23 or so Muslim.
22 Arab Muslim nations and 300 million Arab Muslims.
Surrounding the state, surrounding the infant nation, ready to pounce on it to destroy it. And in fact, there have been effort after effort to do that in the War of Independence in 1956, in 1967, in 73, and 82, and it just goes on and on.
Yeah, I think we have a graphic up now, Ken, showing little Israel in the middle of this Muslim nation. And look,
now,
gosh.
Now, every one of those nations exists for the purpose of destroying Israel.
Yeah, I mean, they see their that's right, their main goal.
Their ultimate goal and policy is the destruction, and so it's just which nation is the strongest or the boldest or getting themselves into the position to destroy.
In fact, that's the only thing the Muslim nations agree upon. They're not exactly friendly to one another. But Israel's the only one that unites them, Ken.
Absolutely,
that's, right.
And then of course the Muslim nation, and I'll speak it in a singular sense. The Muslim nation exerts a tremendous influence throughout the world simply because they are sitting on top of such large oil, petroleum reserves, and therefore throttle the economics of the world.
Sure, so the nations are forced to deal with them, to overlook terrorism and overt aggression, and to accuse Israel of all kinds of things. Israel is really the David in this thing, and the Muslim nation is Goliath. And so somehow they've turned that around, that Israel is the aggressor.
Well, that's propaganda.
That's propaganda. Okay, now, but we were talking about America, Ken.
Yeah,
and America has a couple of paths ahead of it, two basic options that we see.
Okay, I think for those watching us tonight, this is really the point that we want to get at. There, as with all of us, there's decisions that stand before us. We have choices, and we can choose righteousness or we can choose evil. And we believe that there's choices before the nation also.
Okay, so America now, and we're talking specifically right now, a new administration is coming into power. America could recognize Israel's God-given position as a global spiritual superpower. There again, remember, he who scattered Israel will regather them and watch them as a shepherd watches his flock. So we have the option now of recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, recognizing that the whole land of Israel is unique, it has potential and benefit for all mankind. What is it that God said way back to Abraham in Genesis 12? I will bless them that bless you, curse them that curse you, but out of you all the nations of the world will be blessed. That opportunity for ministry and blessing is available today to the Jewish people for that blessing to come out of that little land and be a blessing to the whole world. The revelation of God. And those people on the hills in Judea and Samaria see that, and see that with the option, with the idea of being elect, see the responsibility to be a blessing. Not to terrorize the Arabs, but to be a blessing to the Arabs. And so this is their role, and we can recognize that role as a sovereign country, the United States, or we could choose another path, Ken.
Okay, before we wrap that up, just I want to emphasize, I know Rabbi Wallman is with us from time to time on this program, and Rabbi Wallman, one of the real leaders, spiritual leaders of Israel today, always maintains this same point that Israel is in a unique position to be beneficial to all of mankind. That's their role, that's their call, and he recognizes that, and it's really true. If God makes a breakthrough in the earth into the human community, he has already determined that he's going to use Israel for that. So we're not talking about just something special for the Jewish people to have a special place where they'd be safe, although that should be the case. We're talking about a special called instrument in the hand of God to bring a blessing to the family of the earth. Now, America, again, a new administration is standing in this position of choice. They can recognize that potential in Israel, the people of Israel, and the land of Israel. On the other hand, America can make the choice to try to maintain its posture as the sole superpower in the world, to arm the Arab Muslims along a balance of power, trying to maintain this tedious position, sort of the king of to continue to play king of the mountain, and ally himself as readily with the Muslim nations as they do with Israel, and not recognizing the spiritual power and the spiritual position of the land and the people of Israel. And if they do that, then we're probably going to end up being in a very difficult position. Jesus in the book of Revelation talks about not caring much about folks that are lukewarm sitting on the fence. He said he'd spew them out of his mouth. And so the second option, which is not very desirable for America, that stands before the new administration, is to be spewed out of the mouth of God. And if that happens, then this nation that has been called forth for a righteous purpose in this day will end up being the lead nation, we believe, in the struggle at Armageddon, in the plains of Megiddo.
Absolutely. Destruction will come on this nation, and everything that bad that we think could happen will come about. Now, you may be sitting at home and say, I'm a born-again Christian. If God's doing something, a blessing to the world, it's coming through us. Well, let me just say that Jesus said salvation is of the Jews. You were grafted in alongside the Jewish people to be part of that blessing. But if you're not in agreement with what God's doing, you can't be part of that blessing. You will wind up being an enemy of God. In fact, God talks in Zechariah, and let me just read what the nations are going to do at some time in the future. Zechariah 12, behold, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes reeling to all the peoples around, and when the siege is against Jerusalem, it will also be against Judah, and it will come about in that day, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples, and all who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. You don't want to be in agreement with the nations of the earth that are going to be gathered against God's people and God's nation and what God's doing. God is a Zionist. He has regathered his people. They didn't gather themselves. He gathered them, Ken.
By the way, just an interesting thought there. If you truly are born again, filled with the Holy Spirit, God sees you as an Israeli, because He has grafted you, and we who are from Gentile backgrounds, we have been grafted in. The Bible tells us to that rich olive tree. And now that is our nation, in fact.
Part of the Commonwealth of Israel.
Part of the Commonwealth of Israel. The first century church understood that. Now, when we look at America and Israel, we believe that, scripturally speaking, God will sovereignly intervene to preserve the people of Israel on the land of Israel. We know that there is no such promise to America. So America stands in the balance. And the new administration stands in a balance.
And that's where that Jeremiah 18 that we read comes into play. It's right before us.
We have two very, very special guests coming to us in a week or so. On January the 29th, Thursday evening, 7:30, Rafaela Siegel, who is the vice mayor of the community of Ketamine, will be with us. Along with Shoshana Shiloh, come out and get acquainted with these folks. They are wonderful illustrations of this faith that is evident in the land of Israel.
Yeah, and they are on the hills saying, our fathers met God on these hills, and we're not leaving till we meet him.
And you're going to those hills?
All right, I'm leading a group up in just less than 2 months. We still could fit you in. If you call right away, we are leaving March 8th to March 20th. Give us a call if you want to be part of this group. That's our program for this evening. Shalom.